Here's your story featuring Keanu Reeves in an inspiring and dramatic moment. Pharmacy employee insults and laughs at an old woman for buying medicine with coins, not aware that Keanu Reeves is looking. It was a quiet afternoon in a small pharmacy in Los Angeles. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as a few customers browsed the aisles. Behind the counter, a young cashier named Dylan sighed impatiently, scrolling through his phone. Then, the bell above the entrance chimed, signaling a new customer. An elderly woman, frail yet dignified, slowly approached the counter. Her hands trembled as she placed a small box of heart medication in front of Dylan. "That will be 22 and 50 cents," Dylan said, barely looking up. The woman nodded and reached into her worn-out purse. With shaky fingers, she pulled out a handful of coins, pennies, nickels, dimes, all she had. Dylan stared at the pile of change and scoffed. "Are you serious? You're paying in coins?" He laughed loudly, shaking his head. "This isn't a vending machine, lady." A few customers turned to look, some with pity, others with mild amusement. The elderly woman's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She carefully counted her coins, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, dear. This is all I have." Dylan rolled his eyes dramatically. "Come on, this is going to take all day. Maybe try carrying a credit card like a normal person." His voice dripped with sarcasm as he leaned back in his chair. At that moment, a man who had been standing nearby took a step forward. He had been watching the scene unfold with quiet intensity. The customers gasped as they recognized him, Keanu Reeves. Dressed casually in jeans and a leather jacket, Keanu's sharp eyes locked onto Dylan. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Without a word, he placed a crisp $100 bill on the counter. "I'll cover her medication," Keanu said in a calm but firm voice. Dylan's smirk disappeared instantly. He fumbled with the register, suddenly flustered. "Oh, Mr. Reeves, I didn't realize." Keanu ignored him and turned to the elderly woman, offering her a gentle smile. "Ma'am, no one should ever be treated like that for trying to take care of themselves." The woman's eyes welled up with tears. "Thank you, young man. You're very kind." Keanu bent slightly and whispered, "You deserve kindness. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The pharmacy was silent. The other customers watched in admiration as Keanu handed the woman her medicine and the change from his $100. She clasped his hands for a brief moment before leaving with gratitude in her heart. Keanu then turned back to Dylan. His voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "Respect costs nothing, but the way you treat people, that will always be remembered." Dylan swallowed hard and nodded, his face pale. Keanu gave him one last look before walking out of the store, leaving behind a lesson no one there would soon forget. What do you think? Would you like any tweaks to the story? Part 2, a lesson in kindness. Dylan stood behind the counter, his face pale as Keanu Reeves disappeared through the glass doors of the pharmacy. The other customers still lingered, whispering among themselves, casting judgmental glances at him. He swallowed hard, suddenly feeling very small. An older gentleman who had been waiting in line stepped forward next. He set down a bottle of cough syrup and looked Dylan right in the eyes. "You know, son, respect isn't about who's watching. It's about who you are when no one is." Dylan's hands trembled slightly as he scanned the item. He could still feel the weight of Keanu's words pressing down on him. He had always thought of his job as just another paycheck, never considering the impact of his attitude on others. Outside the pharmacy, Keanu walked slowly toward his motorcycle, adjusting his helmet. But before he could mount it, he heard a voice behind him. "Mr. Reeves, wait." It was Dylan. He had run out of the store, breathless, his apron still on. He hesitated, shuffling his feet like a nervous child. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I shouldn't have treated that woman like that." Keanu turned, studying the young man. "Why did you?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Dylan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know. I guess I was having a bad day, and I took it out on her. I didn't think it mattered." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "It always matters." He leaned slightly toward Dylan, his piercing gaze steady. "You don't know what battles people are fighting. That woman, she probably counted every one of those coins just to afford her medicine. And you made her feel small for it." Dylan lowered his eyes, guilt washing over him. "I get it now." Keanu softened slightly, placing a hand on Dylan's shoulder. It's not about never making mistakes. It's about learning from them. Dylan looked up, determination in his eyes. I'll do better, I swear. Keanu gave him a small nod, then slipped on his helmet. Good, because the world needs more kindness. With that, he started his motorcycle, revved the engine, and rode off into the city, leaving Dylan standing there. Changed. When Dylan returned inside, the old woman's receipt was still on the counter. He picked it up and looked at the total, $22.50. With a deep breath, he reached into his own wallet, took out $25, and placed it into the store's charity donation box. For the first time in a long while, he felt lighter. That day, Dylan didn't just meet Keanu Reeves, he learned a lesson he would never forget. Would you like me to continue or modify anything? Part 3. A Ripple Effect. Dylan stood behind the counter, feeling an unfamiliar weight in his chest. Not shame, but the realization that he had the power to be better. His fingers traced the edge of the receipt, and he glanced at the donation box where he had placed his own money. The next customer stepped forward, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a few groceries in her cart. She hesitated before pulling out her wallet, carefully counting out bills. Dylan noticed her hands shaking slightly as she handed over the money. He took a deep breath. This is your chance. You know what? He said, forcing a smile, though it felt more natural than before. We've got a special discount today. He quickly punched in a small markdown, taking a few dollars off her total. The woman blinked in surprise. Oh, really? That's kind of you. Thank you. Dylan nodded. Have a great day. The woman smiled, genuinely smiled, and walked away. And for the first time, Dylan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. A week later, Dylan was still thinking about that day, about Keanu, about the old woman, about how one moment of kindness or cruelty could change someone's life. He had started treating customers differently, smiling more, listening, offering small acts of kindness where he could, and people noticed. His manager, Mrs. Peterson, pulled him aside one evening. Dylan, she said, crossing her arms, I've been watching you. You've changed. Dylan's stomach dropped. In a bad way. She let out a small laugh. No, in a way that makes me want to promote you. His eyes widened. Wait, what? She nodded. We need more employees who actually care about people. Keep this up, and I see a future for you here. For the first time in his life, Dylan felt like his job wasn't just a paycheck. It was a chance to make a difference, even in the smallest ways. And all because one man, Keanu Reeves, had reminded him what respect really meant. Meanwhile, Keanu sat in a small cafe across town, sipping his black coffee. He didn't need to look at his phone to know the story had spread. A blurry security cam video of the incident had gone viral. Someone had recorded him paying for the old woman's medicine. Social media exploded with praise. Keanu Reeves saves the day again. Pure class. Hollywood needs more men like this. But Keanu didn't care about any of that. He cared about whether Dylan had truly changed, and something in his gut told him he had. With a satisfied nod, Keanu finished his coffee, left a generous tip, and walked out into the sunset. Because for him, kindness wasn't just a moment. It was a way of life. The end. Would you like any changes or maybe another continuation? Part 4. The Unexpected Reunion. A month had passed since the incident at the pharmacy, and Dylan had truly changed. He wasn't just working for a paycheck anymore, he was working with purpose. He greeted customers warmly, helped elderly patrons carry their bags, and even started a small donation jar for those struggling to pay for medicine. One evening, just as the store was about to close, the bell above the door chimed. Dylan looked up and froze. Standing there, in his signature black jacket and jeans, was Keanu Reeves. For a moment, Dylan thought he was imagining things. Keanu had already done his part. Why would he come back? Keanu stepped forward with a small smile. Hey, Dylan. Dylan blinked. You remember my name? Keanu chuckled. Of course, I like to check in on people. He glanced around the store. I heard you've been doing good things. Dylan swallowed hard, feeling a lump in his throat. I've been trying, he admitted. That day, it changed me. Keanu nodded approvingly. That's all that matters. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. He placed it on the counter and slid it toward Dylan. What's this? Dylan asked hesitantly. Keanu grinned. Open it. With shaky hands, Dylan tore open the envelope. Inside was a letter and a check. His breath caught in his throat when he saw the amount, 10,000. Dylan's eyes widened. What? I can't accept this. Keanu leaned forward slightly. Yes, you can. It's not charity, it's a thank you, for learning, for growing, for choosing kindness when you didn't have to. Dylan felt a wave of emotion crash over him. I don't know what to say. Keanu smiled. Then don't say anything. Just keep paying it forward. Dylan gripped the check, his mind racing. He could finally go back to college. He could help his mom with rent. He could do something meaningful. Tears welled in his eyes as he extended his hand. Thank you, Keanu, for everything. Keanu shook his hand firmly. Just promise me one thing. Anything. Keanu's eyes twinkled. Next time someone's struggling, don't wait for a Hollywood actor to step in. Be the one who makes a difference. Dylan laughed through his tears. Deal. Keanu gave him one last nod before turning and walking toward the door. As he stepped outside, the city lights reflecting off his motorcycle, he glanced back one last time. Dylan stood at the counter, still holding the check, looking like a man who had just been given a second chance. Keanu smiled to himself. Maybe he had. With that, he put on his helmet, revved his engine, and disappeared into the night. His job here was done. The end, for real this time. What do you think? Or should I add an extra twist? Part 5, A New Beginning. Dylan stood behind the counter long after Keanu had left, staring at the check. His heart pounded, not just from excitement, but from the sheer weight of the moment. What do I do with this? He thought. The money could change his life. He could go back to school, help his struggling mother, even start over. But then his eyes drifted to the donation jar sitting by the register. The small glass container had barely a few dollars in coins inside, contributions from customers who wanted to help those who couldn't afford their medicine. Dylan took a deep breath. Maybe Keanu was right. Maybe this wasn't just about him. The next day, Dylan walked into the pharmacy early before his shift started. He found his manager, Mrs. Peterson, in her office sipping her morning coffee. I need to talk to you, he said, setting the check on her desk. Her eyes widened. Dylan, what is this? He exhaled slowly. It's from Keanu Reeves, but I don't want to keep it all for myself. She stared at him in disbelief. What do you mean? Dylan sat down. I want to use part of it to help me go back to school, but I also want to start something bigger. A fund for people who can't afford their medication. No one should have to scrape together coins just to stay alive. Mrs. Peterson was silent for a moment. Then she smiled. You've really changed, haven't you? Dylan grinned. I had a pretty good teacher. 1 month later, the Reeves Fund. The pharmacy had a new addition, a small sign by the register that read, The Reeves Fund, helping those in need. A percentage of sales now went toward assisting customers who couldn't afford their medication. The donation jar was replaced with an official fund, and soon, word spread throughout the community. People donated, strangers helped strangers, and one evening as Dylan was closing up, he heard a familiar voice. Nice sign. Dylan turned and there he was, Keanu Reeves. Dylan chuckled. Figured you'd show up eventually. Keanu smirked. You really did it. Dylan nodded. Yeah, and it's just the beginning. Keanu clapped him on the shoulder. Proud of you, man. Dylan grinned. Well, I had to prove I was worth the investment. Keanu laughed. I'd say you did. As Keanu walked toward the door, Dylan called after him. Hey, before you go, mind signing the sign? Keanu turned back, took a Sharpie from the counter, and wrote in bold letters beneath the fund's name, Be kind, always, Keanu Reeves. With that, he gave Dylan one last nod and disappeared into the night. And Dylan, he had never felt more alive. The real story wasn't about a Hollywood actor stepping in, it was about what happened after, and how one moment of kindness could change everything. The end, for real this time. I hope you like this final chapter. Unless you want a sequel? Nash Part 6, The Return of an Old Friend. Months passed, and the Reeves Fund became more than just a small pharmacy initiative. It grew into a full-blown community project. Other local businesses joined in, offering small discounts or donations to help those in need. People who once struggled to afford medicine now had hope, all because of a single act of kindness. And Dylan, he had changed completely. No longer the impatient cashier who once mocked an old woman, he had become a respected figure in the pharmacy. even training new employees on customer compassion. He was also back in school, studying business management. His dream was to expand the fund into something much bigger. One evening, just as he was locking up the store, the bell above the door chimed. An elderly woman walked in, the same woman from that fateful day. Dylan's breath caught. She looked healthier now, her frail hands steadier. She was wearing a soft blue scarf, and her eyes carried warmth instead of sadness. She smiled at him. "Young man, I wasn't sure if you'd still be here." Dylan stepped forward. "Of course, He hesitated, unsure what to say. He had carried guilt about that day for so long. "I never got to apologize properly. I was terrible to you." The woman chuckled. "You were, dear, but that's in the past." She reached into her purse, not for coins this time, but for a neatly folded bill. She placed it on the counter. "I heard about your fund," she said softly, "and I wanted to give something back. Someone once helped me when I needed it most. Now it's my turn." Dylan's throat tightened. He looked down at the bill. $50. It wasn't about the amount, it was about the gesture. With a warm smile, he placed the bill into the donation jar and covered her hands with his own. "Thank you for everything." She patted his hand gently. "No, dear, thank you." Meanwhile, across town, Keanu Reeves sat in a quiet cafe scrolling through his phone. An article caught his eye. Former pharmacy cashier transforms store into community help center, inspired by a mysterious Hollywood star. Keanu chuckled. He never wanted the credit. But seeing the impact of that one moment, the way it rippled outward, changing lives, he knew he had done something right. With a satisfied smile, he put down his phone, finished his coffee, and walked out into the city. Because for Keanu, it was never about the headlines. It was about making the world just a little bit better. One act of kindness at a time. The true end, or is it? This feels like a full circle moment, but if you want to spin off or a different direction, let me know.